If you had to choose between fighting for what you believe in or protecting who you love, what would you do?
Hi, I'm Yuna, and I welcome you to Happiness of Love. Get ready for an exciting story that will leave you amazed. Enjoy the video, and may God bless you and your entire family. Have an amazing day.
Gabriel Montgomery threw his cell phone onto the marble table with such force that the impact made the coffee in his cup vibrate. He leaned back in the leather chair, massaging his temples with an impatience that seemed constant in his routine. The message had just arrived. An emergency meeting with his grandfather, Edward Montgomery, was scheduled for later that afternoon. The reason? Some urgent and personal issue that Gabriel was already sure would involve another lecture about his lack of family values. He rolled his eyes and stood up, adjusting his tie with the precision of someone who was always in control. His footsteps echoed through the large glass room, overlooking the Manhattan skyline. He had a whole morning of meetings planned, million-dollar contracts to review and demanding investors to calm down. There was no room for sentimental distractions, especially those coming from a man who insisted on running his life like a board game. Across town, in a small apartment in the heart of Brooklyn, Elena Park was checking out the final details of an activity she planned to use in her next class. In the cramped living room, stacks of books and colorful sheets competed for space with a kettle boiling on the stove. His gaze strayed to the window, where the neighborhood's old buildings formed a welcoming contrast to the modernity that rose in the background. The sound of excited voices outside caught his attention. She smiled as she saw the neighborhood students playing on the sidewalk, their laughter filling the air with an energy that reminded Elena why she loved teaching so much. Since his parents passed away, he dedicated himself to caring for children and young people in the community. They were the heart of everything he did, his reason for continuing even in the face of financial challenges. His phone vibrated, interrupting his thoughts. An unexpected message appeared on the screen, the sender signed with a name that made her frown, Edward Montgomery. Elena felt a chill run down her spine as she opened the text. He requested, or rather, insisted, on an urgent meeting that same afternoon. The memory of her mother mentioning the Montgomerys years ago set off a warning in her mind, but she had no idea what to expect. Hours later, in the luxurious Montgomery Group meeting room, Gabriel leaned back in his chair with a frown on his face while his grandfather, with the calm that only the most experienced master, placed an envelope in front of him. "You need to get married, Gabriel." Edward's deep voice cut the air like a sentence. Gabriel laughed, but the sound was dry and humorless. "Is this a test? A prank? Because I have other priorities, like running your company and keeping the money coming in." Edward crossed his arms, impassive. "I'm not kidding. It's simple. If you're not married in 3 months, you'll lose your position in the company. And before you ask, I've already chosen your bride." Gabriel's laugh died in his throat, replaced by a look of pure shock. In the Montgomery Group's large meeting room, Gabriel was still stunned. He tried to process his grandfather's words, but his anger was growing fast, rising like a wave that threatened to swallow everything around him. "Did you choose my bride?" He finally broke the silence, his voice thick with disbelief. "I barely have time for my own life and now you want me to make time for a marriage of convenience? That's medieval, Edward." The old patriarch maintained his firm stance. "Medieval or not, it's necessary. Don't you understand that the company's stability is directly linked to its image? I'm done covering for your arrogance. This will show the board that you're capable of more than just financial results." Gabriel ran a hand through his hair, the gesture betraying his frustration. And who was this woman lucky enough to be thrown into the cage with the lion? Some bored socialite waiting for her chance to shine in high society? Edward leaned forward, his voice now lower but cutting. "No. Elena Park." The name floated into the room like restrained thunder. Gabriel snorted, a wry laugh escaping his lips. "Who the hell is Elena Park?" Meanwhile, Elena paused nervously in front of the Montgomery Group building, looking at the imposing architectural details with a growing sense of dislocation. With every step that took her inside, she felt like she was crossing an invisible line between two worlds. His heart was pounding, a mix of curiosity and restlessness. What could a man as powerful as Edward Montgomery want with someone like her? Greeted by a cold and efficient assistant, she was guided to the elevator. The mirrored walls reflected her image, and for the first time in years, she found herself analyzing her own appearance. The simple hair, the modest outfit, the hands nervously clutching her worn bag. As much as she tried to convince herself that she didn't need to impress anyone, it was impossible to ignore the idea that here, she was completely insignificant. When the door to the meeting room opened, she was greeted by 2 pairs of eyes, one belonging to Edward, who smiled warmly to reassure her, and another, cold and appraising, who seemed to glare at her. Gabriel Montgomery. Elena felt pinned to the floor, her breathing becoming shallow. He was everything she expected, and more. The tailored suit highlighted her imposing posture, but it was the look that disarmed her. He seemed to evaluate every detail, as if searching for flaws or reasons to despise her. Gabriel broke the silence with a tone full of sarcasm. "So, you are Elena Park, the savior chosen to fix my chaotic life. I must say, I am impressed by your boldness." Elena blinked, surprised by the direct hostility. She wasn't one to back down, but the intensity of the moment made her hesitate for a second. Taking a deep breath, he replied, "I didn't choose to be here, Mr. Montgomery. This is as far-fetched for me as it seems to be for you." Edward intervened, his voice calm but firm. "That's enough, Gabriel. Don't forget that you both have something to gain from this. Elena, please sit down. Let's set the record straight." The dialogue continued, each word loaded with tension. Gabriel, unable to contain his sarcasm, launched scathing comments that poked Elena, trying to get a reaction. She, in turn, maintained her composure with effort, her determination visible, but his words struck something deep inside her, a sense of not belonging that she struggled to overcome. Edward explained the reasons behind his choice. For Gabriel, it was an attempt at balance. For Elena, an opportunity to help her community. The Montgomery Group's corporate expansion project threatened the neighborhood where she lived and worked, but Edward had promised to use his influence to protect the place if she agreed to the marriage. Elena felt torn. Accepting meant giving up her independence, her dignity, to enter into a relationship with a man who clearly despised her. Refusing meant leaving their community vulnerable. Gabriel, on the other hand, was furious. The deal appeared to strip him of his controlling role. He hated the idea of being manipulated, but part of his mind began to ponder. Could a sham marriage be so terrible? Maybe it was a matter of tolerating Elena until the deadline was up. After a long pause, Edward asked the definitive question, "So, do you accept it or not?" Elena looked at Gabriel, their eyes meeting. There was a silent challenge between them, a clash that no one but them would understand. Finally, she said, her voice firm but charged with emotion, "I accept. But on one condition, I keep my freedom outside of this agreement." Gabriel narrowed his eyes, realizing that this woman was not as fragile as she seemed. He responded with a bitter smile. "I accept. But don't expect me to make things easy." The ceremony took place quickly, without pomp and emotion. The silence during the brief event was so thick that it seemed to stifle any possibility of relief. Gabriel looked impeccable, his tailored suit exuding an almost inhuman perfection. Elena, in a simple but elegant dress, kept her face up, even with the weight of every glance she received. There were no smiles. There were no vows exchanged with an open heart. Just a cold exchange of words dictated by the judge who officiated the wedding. Now, the next day, they were faced with a new reality. Elena woke up early, as she always did in her small Brooklyn apartment. But when she opened her eyes in that huge, impeccably decorated room in Gabriel's penthouse, she felt completely out of place. The automatic curtains opened on their own, revealing a view of Central Park. The air felt heavy, almost unreal, as if she had been transported to a world where she didn't belong. Gabriel, on the other hand, was already on his feet. He was a man of relentless routine, waking up at 6 sharp to start his day. When Elena came out of the room, still dazed, she found him sitting at the breakfast table, reading the newspaper in silence. There were no signs of welcome or attempts to break the ice. Just the sound of pages being turned and the clinking of the cutlery he used with surgical precision. She hesitated before approaching. "Good morning." His voice was low but firm. He glanced at her over the top of the newspaper, arching an eyebrow. "Good morning." His response was brief, emotionless, as if he were fulfilling a formality. Elena sat down and tried to ignore the discomfort that seemed to surround the room. The table was too big, the dishes were arranged almost exaggeratedly. A feast, when she barely ate a piece of toast in the morning. "I don't need that much," she said, trying to ease the tension. Gabriel looked up again, this time with a touch of irony. "You are in my house now. Here, we have standards." That sentence was like a spark. Elena could feel the heat of irritation rising in her chest, but she forced herself to take a deep breath. It wasn't worth starting an argument right at the beginning of that forced marriage. The days that followed were marked by interactions that oscillated between coldness and confrontation. Gabriel seemed determined to demonstrate that this was just a formality for him, while Elena struggled to maintain her dignity amid the small humiliations he inflicted with his sarcastic comments. One morning, as she was preparing her schedule for school, Gabriel entered the room with his usual authoritarian air. "You should rethink this job. It doesn't suit your new position." Elena, who was packing papers into her bag, stopped and looked up at him, surprised and irritated. "My position? I continue to be myself. I'm not going to give up who I am because of this marriage." Gabriel crossed his arms, leaning slightly towards him. "You're a Montgomery now. You need to act like it." She was silent for a few seconds, feeling his words like an attempt to erase her. Finally he replied, his voice full of controlled emotion, I accepted this marriage to protect the people I love, not to transform myself into someone else. If you think you can mold me like you do with your corporate projects, you are very mistaken. Gabriel remained motionless, but there was something different in his gaze. It was as if, for the first time, he was really listening. Despite this, the following days remained tense. Gabriel was methodical and controlled, while Elena was emotional and determined. The contrast between them was evident in each interaction, from the way they organized their schedules to the way they reacted to the small adversities of coexistence. But, between the provocations and the charged silences, unexpected moments began to emerge. Like when Elena forgot her school key and Gabriel, despite complaining, accompanied her there. Or when he unknowingly listened as she read a poem to her students during an online class and, for a brief moment, seemed almost impressed. Even so, the barrier between them remained. Both were trapped by their own beliefs and fears, resisting the idea that this marriage could be more than a binding contract. The streets of Brooklyn were vibrant that morning, as always. Elena walked quickly towards the school, greeting the neighbors who passed by with a smile that, although sincere, hid the storm that was growing inside her. Gabriel's constant presence in her life, with his sharp sarcasm and barely concealed disregard for everything she valued, was beginning to wear her down more than she wanted to admit. Arriving at school, Elena entered the teacher's room with firm steps. It was a refuge, a place where she still felt like she had control. But his day was abruptly interrupted when a group of parents and teachers gathered to discuss alarming news, a proposed redevelopment that threatened not only the school, but also the neighborhood. The Montgomery Group project, one of the parents said, his voice thick with frustration. They want to build a shopping center right here, where our children go to school. It's unfair. Where else can we go? Elena felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. She knew Gabriel was involved in ambitious projects, but had never connected the dots. This was personal. This was the neighborhood where he grew up, where his parents taught him the value of community. And now, he was about to destroy everything. When he arrived at the penthouse that night, his anger was already boiling. Gabriel was in the office, talking on the phone, his relaxed posture indicating that he was completely oblivious to what had happened that day. Elena entered without knocking, crossing her arms as she watched him. He looked up, visibly annoyed at being interrupted, but motioned for her to wait while he ended the call. Did you know that? She snapped as soon as he hung up. Gabriel raised his eyebrows. Know what, exactly? That your precious Montgomery Group is trying to demolish the school where I teach? That you are planning to turn the neighborhood into another playground for millionaires? He leaned back in his chair, his narrowed eyes assessing her. This isn't personal, Elena. It's business. And if you think you can change something, welcome to the real world. She stepped closer, indignation vibrating in her voice. For me, this is very personal. It's not about numbers or profits, Gabriel. It's about people, about children, about a community that has nowhere to go if you destroy everything. How can you be so insensitive? For a moment, something in his eyes changed. A shadow of doubt passed quickly, but it disappeared before she could interpret it. He stood up, his height and presence making the surroundings even more oppressive. Elena, he said calmly but firmly, you need to understand that sometimes sacrifices are necessary. It's not about insensitivity, it's about progress. She felt a hot tear slip from the corner of her eye, but quickly wiped it away before he noticed. Progress? His voice shook. Progress that destroys lives? Is this what you call progress? Gabriel opened his mouth to respond, but closed it again. For some reason, he couldn't formulate the logical defense that normally came to him so easily. Something about Elena's passion disarmed him, even if he would never admit it. That night, while Elena cried softly in her room, Gabriel lay awake in his office, staring at a graph on the computer that no longer made sense. Her words echoed in his mind, along with memories he tried to bury. His own neighborhood had been modernized years ago, forcing his family to move. He remembered the look of defeat in his mother's eyes, although he had never spoken about it to anyone. The next day, the silence between them was heavy. Gabriel left for the office early, diving into a series of meetings that would normally cheer him up, but now felt like a burden. During the afternoon, Elena received an unexpected message from one of the students who stayed at school late. The message said that the school board was considering ending the next semester early to negotiate the sale of the land. As she left school, determined to stop this, Elena crossed paths with Gabriel, who was parked near the building in an elegant car. He rolled down the window and called her. Between. Why would I do that? She replied, her voice firm. He sighed. Because we need to talk. About all of this. She hesitated, but got into the car. The atmosphere inside was tense, but Gabriel seemed more human than before. He started talking, explaining the challenges of maintaining a large company, the investors, the difficult decisions. But then, to his own surprise, he did something he rarely did. He asked her opinion. "How would you handle that?" he asked, no sarcasm, no superior tone. Just genuine. Elena realized that this was the first time she had seen Gabriel with a mask slightly lowered. She explained, without hesitation, what that community meant to her and others. Gabriel listened, and for the first time in a long time, he didn't immediately respond with a sarcastic joke or a rebuttal. The following days were marked by a precarious balance, like a dance in which neither of them knew the steps well. Gabriel, to his surprise, began to realize that Elena's words echoed more than he would have liked. With each business meeting, with each presentation slide that highlighted numbers and forecasts, something inside him turned over. It was the memory of the passion in her eyes, the way she spoke about the community with a conviction he had never associated with himself. Elena, as much as she hated to admit it, began to see something beyond Gabriel's arrogant facade. There were moments, rare but present, when he seemed genuine. Like when he surprised her at school one afternoon, bringing her coffee and staying silent while she gave one last lesson to her students. He watched from a distance, as if trying to decipher what moved her. Still, the space between them continued to be filled with resistance and disagreements. Both were armed, each tied to their own wounds and pride. One night, Gabriel was in the penthouse office, reviewing contracts, when he received a call from his older sister, Victoria. The relationship between them had always been distant. Victoria was a ruthless strategist at the company, but also deeply cynical, with an almost supernatural ability to manipulate situations to her advantage. "So, I heard rumors about the big wedding of the year," she began, her voice thick with irony. "You know, it's not just any CEO who turns his love life into a public soap opera." Gabriel rolled his eyes, leaning back in the chair. "If you called to make a joke, I'm busy." "Ah, dear brother, do not underestimate my concern. Some council members are wondering about the legitimacy of this marriage. You know how old people are, obsessed with reputation." He felt his body stiffen. "And what exactly are they saying?" "That perhaps this is all theater. That your lovely wife, though charming, seems a little out of place in our sphere. That raises questions and doubts." Gabriel took a deep breath, trying not to show the discomfort he felt. "I've got this covered. And I don't need you to spread any more innuendo." "Really take care, Gabriel," she replied, her voice sweet as poison. "You know what's at stake." When the call ended, Gabriel remained motionless for a few seconds. Victoria's words were a threat in disguise, and he knew she would not hesitate to use that narrative to weaken him in front of the council. Meanwhile, Elena was in the penthouse kitchen, trying to prepare something simple for dinner. Cooking was a way to disconnect from everything, but that night, her mind was heavy. The threat to the neighborhood, the fake marriage, the judgmental looks she received from Gabriel's employees, everything seemed to conspire against her. When Gabriel entered, the silence between them seemed more charged than usual. He grabbed a glass of water and stood leaning against the counter, watching her in silence for a few moments before finally speaking. "My sister called," he said, casually, but there was a serious tone behind the words. Elena looked at him, waiting for him to continue. "She thinks our marriage is a sham. And apparently she's not alone." She stopped what she was doing, feeling the weight of the statement. "And what does that mean?" "It means some people would like to use it against me. Against us." Elena felt a mixture of fear and anger. "So now, on top of everything else, I have to prove something to these people? Isn't it enough that I'm already here, in a marriage I never wanted?" Gabriel took a step forward, his eyes boring into hers. "Do you think this is easy for me? Do you think I chose this?" "No," she replied, voice firm. "But maybe you should start asking yourself why so many people question you. Maybe it's not about me, but about the kind of man you choose to be." Her words were like a blow. Gabriel looked away, but the impact was evident in his posture. He left without saying anything else, leaving Elena alone in the kitchen, breathing heavily and her heart racing. The next morning, Gabriel was back at the company office when he was called to an emergency meeting with Victoria and other board members. She was waiting for him with a smile that didn't hide her satisfaction. "Gabriel," she began, in a seemingly friendly tone, "the investors are concerned. They want assurances that your personal situation will not compromise the company. I have proposed that they meet your wife, at a formal event." He narrowed his eyes, feeling the trap forming. "You want to show her off like a trophy?" "I won't do that." "Ah, but you don't have a choice," Victoria replied, crossing her arms. "Either prove that this marriage is solid, or they will begin to question your leadership." Gabriel's anger was growing, but behind it, something else was emerging, a genuine concern for Elena. He knew that exposing her to this kind of situation would be cruel, but the alternative could cost everything. The night of the event arrived surrounded by almost palpable tension. The Montgomery Group event room was a spectacle of luxury and sophistication, filled with people who seemed to live exclusively to impress. The walls were decorated with gold panels and tall mirrors that reflected the glow of the crystal chandeliers. Musicians played in the background, their soft melodies competing with the buzz of conversations filled with subtext and innuendo. Elena, standing at the entrance with Gabriel by her side, felt like a fish out of water. The elegant dress she was wearing, a choice made by a designer hired by Gabriel, didn't make her feel any more comfortable. It was like shining armor covering someone who knew they didn't belong in this world. Gabriel, by contrast, seemed completely at ease, moving with the confidence of someone who knew exactly how to manipulate every look and word to his advantage. But Elena noticed something different about him that night, a rigidity in his shoulders, as if he carried the weight of the world beneath the impeccable fabric of his suit. "Remember," he said quietly as they walked into the main hall, "we don't need to convince everyone. Just enough so that the board has no doubts about the authenticity of this." Elena shot him a sharp look, her voice a bitter whisper. "I know how to pretend, Gabriel. I've been pretending since the day you dragged me to this wedding." He opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, they were surrounded by a group of investors and their spouses, all wearing plastic smiles that barely hid their mischievous curiosity. "Ah, so this is the famous wife?" A woman in a sparkling red dress exclaimed, looking Elena up and down. Elena felt the piercing gaze, but forced a polite smile. "Elena Park. It's a pleasure to meet you." Gabriel observed everything in silence, his expression impenetrable. But inside, he was torn. Part of him wanted to protect her from that cruel exposure, while another part, the prouder one, believed she needed to face it, as he always had. As the night progressed, Elena was bombarded with veiled questions and condescending comments. Every word seemed to carry a hidden judgment. "Where did you guys meet again? You must be adjusting to our lifestyle, right? The transition from teacher to CEO wife must be challenging." Each comment was like a small stab, but Elena remained firm, responding with an elegance that she herself did not know how to possess. No matter how hurt she was, she refused to give in to their game. Meanwhile, Gabriel was in a separate conversation with Victoria and some council members. She spoke with a smile full of venom. "Your wife is doing better than I expected, Gabriel. Maybe she has more ability for this than we imagined." He ignored the provocation, but he couldn't shake the image of Elena facing all of this alone. The forced shine in his eyes, the smile that didn't reach his heart. He recognized that because he had used it many times. Shortly after, Gabriel finally managed to get close to Elena. She was standing by a window, an untouched glass of champagne in her hand. When he arrived, he saw that her expression had changed. It was a mix of exhaustion and something darker, like a sadness she couldn't completely hide. "Are you well?" he asked, but the real concern in his voice surprised him. Elena turned to him, and for a moment, he saw the real Elena, without the masks. "I'm used to dealing with judgments, Gabriel. But this..." She paused, trying to find the words. "It's a different kind of humiliation. And you knew it would be like this." He opened his mouth to respond, but he had nothing to say. He knew. And that made him hate what she was going through because of him even more. The situation reached a critical point when one of the investors, visibly drunk, made a direct comment that went beyond all limits. "You must be very grateful, right? It's not every day that a humble teacher manages to hook someone like Gabriel Montgomery. A story worthy of a fairy tale." The room fell silent. Gabriel felt his blood boil, but before he could respond, Elena took a step forward. "I'm grateful, yes," she said, her voice calm but firm. "Grateful for my students, my community, and the opportunity to work every day on something that really matters. And as much as I appreciate your words, I think you're underestimating what dignity means." The man was embarrassed, and a wave of murmurs swept through the room. Gabriel watched the scene with a mixture of admiration and guilt. Elena wasn't just strong, she was so much more than he deserved. That night, back at the penthouse, the tension between them exploded. "You knew it would be like this," she accused, the words filled with hurt. "You put me in this position knowing I would be judged and ridiculed. And worst of all, you did nothing to protect me." Gabriel didn't back down, but his eyes were filled with something she didn't recognize: remorse. "I know," he admitted, voice low. "But I didn't know it would affect me like this." Elena looked at him, confused. "What does that mean?" He looked away, unable to express what he felt. Because, for the first time, Gabriel Montgomery had no control, neither over the situation nor over his own emotions. The day dawned gray, perfectly reflecting Gabriel's mood. The previous night had been marked by unbearable tension, every word exchanged with Elena leaving a mark that he didn't know how to erase. He wasn't the kind of man who admitted mistakes, much less someone who recognized his own guilt, but now there was something different. Something about her made him question everything. He was in his office at the company, immersed in numbers and reports, trying to ignore the discomfort that Elena had planted in him. However, his thoughts were constantly interrupted by flashes of her face, the firmness in her eyes when she defended her values, the hurt he had caused, even without wanting to admit it. That's when an unexpected message arrived from one of the directors of the redevelopment project. Gabriel opened the email, which was supposed to be just another technical update, but his face hardened as he read it. Attached were documents detailing a petition started by the Brooklyn community, organized by none other than Elena Park. He clenched his fists, a mixture of irritation and respect taking over him. Elena was fighting against him, against her project, against her investors. But more than that, she was fighting for what she believed in. He should have been furious, but the truth was he felt a reluctant admiration growing. Meanwhile, Elena was at her school, surrounded by papers and signatures. The petition had grown faster than she expected, and now she had enough support to get the city's attention. But along with the satisfaction came a weight, the realization that this fight would put Gabriel in an even more difficult position. She wanted to hate him for who he was, but in the midst of that, moments from the last few days kept popping into her mind. The way he watched her without saying anything, the shadow of something not resolved in his eyes. He was not just arrogance and sarcasm, there was something deeper there, something that made him act as he acted. When Elena arrived on the coverage that night, she found Gabriel in the office, holding the documents she immediately recognized as part of the petition. "Your heart has accelerated." "So that's it," he started, raising the papers. "Are you officially challenging me?" Elena took a deep breath, keeping her calm. "I'm advocating something that matters, Gabriel. Something you seem to have forgotten how to do it." He gave a bitter laugh. "Do you think this is so simple? Do you think you can fight an entire system with a handful of signatures?" She crossed her arms, looking at him straight into her eyes. "Maybe not. But at least I'm trying. And you, Gabriel? When was the last time you really tried to fight for something that wasn't profit?" The question hit him like a punch. He wanted to answer, refute, but couldn't. Because the truth was that he didn't remember. That night Gabriel walked away from Elena, claiming to need some air. He left and wandered the city streets, something he rarely did. New York's lights were as bright as his mind was tumultuous. He finally stopped in front of a small park, a place he had not visited for years. He sat on one of the banks and, for the first time in a long time, allowed himself to remember. He remembered his childhood in a neighborhood like Elena's, how his mother struggled to put food on the table while his father worked endless hours in a worn job. When his father died, Gabriel was just a teenager, but the weight of taking responsibility for his family fell on him. His grandfather, Edward Montgomery, then entered the scene, offering a way out but at a cost. Gabriel was shaped, hardened, transformed into a successful machine that could not afford to fail. Upon returning home, he found Elena in the kitchen, distracted, stirring in a notebook with notes on the petition. He stopped at the door, watching her for a moment before speaking. "I grew up in a place like your neighborhood," he said, his voice low. Elena turned, surprised by the vulnerability in her words. "My mother, she fought how you were fighting now. And when we lost my father, it seemed that the whole world was crumbling. My grandfather took me out of that place, but took something from me in return. He taught me that there was no room for mistakes, that feelings were weaknesses." Elena stared at him, feeling her heart tighten. For the first time, she saw him like a man, not just like an arrogant CEO. "This doesn't mean you have to be like this forever, Gabriel," she said softly. He laughed, an empty sound. "It's not that simple. I can't just change. There are things that depend on me, people who expect me to be exactly what I am. And don't you think you deserve more than that? What does it deserve to be more than what do you expect from you?" Gabriel was silent, staring at her as if she had said something he had never considered before. The days that followed Gabriel's outburst brought unusual calm to the roof, as if both needed time to process the truths that had emerged. However, this tranquility was not free of tension. It threw like a rope about to break, loaded with something unnameable. Gabriel began to notice small details in Elena who had previously gone unnoticed. The way she held a cup of tea with both hands, as if looking for comfort in the heat. The way your face illuminated by answering messages from your students, even on the most exhaustive days. It was impossible to ignore the serene force she carried, a quality that he hadn't seen for a long time in anyone. Elena, on the other hand, began to notice cracks in Gabriel's armor. He was still sarcastic and controlling, but now there were moments of hesitation in his words, as if he no longer knew where the relentless CEO ended and the man began behind the facade. One afternoon, while Gabriel worked in his office, Elena decided to act. She entered without beating, carrying a box full of papers and reports. He looked at her, raising an eyebrow. "I hope you have something interesting there," he said, although there was a lightness in his tone that wasn't there before. She put the box on the table, crossing her arms. "I've been researching. Did you know that there are ways to reuse an area without expelling the communities that already live there?" Gabriel leaned forward, his eyes narrowed as he flipped the documents. "This will cost more." Go, she agreed, without hesitation. But it will preserve what really matters. And in the end, you will have a grateful and loyal community instead of resentful. He looked at her for a long moment, something in her gaze she couldn't decipher. Finally, he said, "Do you really believe the world works like this?" "I believe you can," she answered, her voice firm. Gabriel sighed, but kept reading. That night, when Elena was about to lie down, she heard a soft knock on her bedroom door. It was Gabriel. He looked different, less polished, more human. "I thought about what you said," he started, leaning on the doorway. "You may be right. Perhaps there are other ways to do this." Elena felt her heart tighten, not for what he said, but by the vulnerable tone in his voice. "I know it's hard for you to think so, Gabriel. But I believe you can be better than that. Better than you think you need to be." He hesitated for a moment before saying, "You make it look so simple." "It's not simple," she replied, her soft voice. "But it's possible." The following days brought changes. Gabriel began reviewing the project's plans by consulting experts in sustainable urbanism and even attending meetings with representatives of the Brooklyn community. For Elena, seeing him strive was almost surreal, but also deeply moving. At the same time, Gabriel began to realize Elena's impact on her life. It was as if she was rebuilding something inside him that he didn't even know she was broken. One night, after another exhaustive meeting, Gabriel found Elena in the kitchen, preparing tea. He got silent, leaning against the bench. "Thank you," he said, surprising even himself. She looked at him confused. "Why?" "For making me see things in another way." Elena gave a little smile. "You didn't need me to do that. You just needed someone who believed you could." Nevertheless, progress was slow and stumbled. Gabriel still faced resistance within the company, especially Victoria, who saw changes as a sign of weakness. "Are you letting an amateur teacher dictate how you drive your business?" she challenged him at a tense meeting. "No," Gabriel answered, his firm voice. "I am learning that there are better ways to do things. Something you should try." Victoria narrowed her eyes, but said nothing more. Elena was also facing her own challenges. The more she saw Gabriel change, the harder it was to deny what she was beginning to feel for him. He was still imperfect, still had moments of arrogance and impatience, but there was something new to him, a vulnerability that made her want to know him more deeply. That night, while both were sitting in the room, a comfortable silence between them, Gabriel finally broke the ice. "Do you think this will work?" he asked, referring to both the project and what was beginning to emerge between them. Elena looked at him, his eyes finding his. "I think it's worth trying." And at that moment something changed between them. On the cold and clear morning that marked the beginning of a crucial week, Gabriel was standing in front of his closet mirror. He adjusted the tie with accurate movements, but his thoughts were far away. The advice had summoned an emergency meeting, and he knew exactly what was at stake. Doubts about their marriage to Elena had become the perfect pretext for Victoria and other board members to question their leadership. Gabriel felt the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. This time, however, something was different. He was not just fighting for his position or the company. He fought for Elena, for protecting her and the respect that had grown between them, unexpectedly and inevitable. When he got out to the living room, he found Elena in the kitchen, making tea. She looked quiet, but he knew she also felt the tension. Since he knew about the meeting, Elena had insisted that he would not have to defend her, that she was used to facing trials. But Gabriel didn't accept it. "No more. You don't have to worry," he said, breaking the silence. She looked at him, her eyes full of sincerity. "I'm not worried about me, Gabriel. I'm worried about you. This is too important to be lost. Because of me." He approached, putting his hands on her shoulders. "Elena, you don't understand. I never fought for anyone but myself before. But now it's different." The board meeting took place at one of the most luxurious conference rooms of the Montgomery Group headquarters. Gabriel entered the stance of those who were used to running attention, but the atmosphere was loaded. Victoria was sitting in the center of the table, with a complacent smile that made it clear that she had something planned. "Gabriel," she started, her tone loaded with false concern, "everyone here has valued their leadership over the years, but there are concerns. Concerns about how your personal life may be affecting your decisions." Gabriel felt anger grow, but kept her under control. "If there's something you mean, Victoria, say directly." Victoria wasted no time. She presented documents, photos taken out of context, emails suggesting that Gabriel and Elena's marriage was a convenience agreement. Gabriel was silent as the other board members murmured with each other, analyzing the manufactured evidence. Finally, he spoke, his voice firm and loaded with authority. "Yes, my marriage started as an obligation. I won't deny that. But what you don't understand is that in the process something has changed. Elena is not just my wife for an agreement. She is my partner. And if someone here dares to question her impact on my life, I invite you to look at the results of what we did together." He presented numbers, reports showing advances in the reurbanization project. Community preservation initiatives had begun to bear fruit, with increasing public approval and even new investors interested in the sustainable approach. "If you want to use my marriage as a weapon to weaken me," he continued, looking straight at Victoria, "make no mistake. Because now I'm stronger than ever. Not because of this company, but because I finally understood that true leadership is not about control. It is about collaboration and respect." The silence that followed was carried. Victoria looked away, realizing that her plan had failed. Meanwhile, Elena was at school, giving her last class of the day. Although he tried to focus, his mind repeatedly returned to Gabriel. For the first time since the beginning of the marriage, she was part of something bigger than herself. It was not just about fighting for the community or preserving their values, it was about Gabriel. Upon finishing the class, he received a call. It was Gabriel, his voice relieved, but still loaded with emotion. "It's done," he said. She felt a wave of relief and heat. "And you?" "I'm fine," he replied. "But I need to see her. Now." Back to the roof, when Gabriel entered the door, he found Elena waiting for him. She got up, but before she could say anything, he approached and held his hands. "I fought for us today," he said, his voice low, but full of emotion. "And I realized that I never want to stop fighting for you again." "For us?" Elena felt the tears come, but did not try to hold them. "I never wanted you to change for me, Gabriel. I just wanted you to see that there is another way of living." He smiled, a rare smile, which illuminated his face like never before. "And you showed me. You showed me everything." They stayed like this for a moment, connected by something that transcended words. The air was cold, but loaded with vibrant energy as Gabriel and Elena walked the streets of Brooklyn. The reurbanization project, which once threatened everything Elena valued, was now a symbol of renewal rather than destruction. Around them, the buildings kept their original facades, while small local businesses thrived. The animated voices of children filled the air, and Gabriel felt something that long seemed impossible: peace. Elena walked by her side, her arm intertwined with his. There was no tension from when they had known themselves, nor the weight of unspoken secrets. Now there was a complicity that spoke more than words could express. She looked at him, her soft smile illuminating her eyes. "It's strange to think about how much things have changed," she said. Gabriel stopped, turning to face her. "They changed for the better." She gave a little laugh. "Do you really think so?" He held his hands, bringing her closer. "Elena, before you, everything I did had to do with control. With proving something to the world. But now I want more than that. I want to build something real. Something that lasts." She felt his words like a hug, warming her against the cold of the night. "And what do you think we are building?" Gabriel smiled, a smile full of tenderness she rarely saw, but was becoming more frequent. "Us." A few days later, a celebration was organized by the community to mark the completion of the project. The space was simple but full of life. Tables were covered with homemade foods, flashing lights decorated the park, and the sound of live music filled the air. It was a celebration not only of conquest, but of resistance and unity. Elena was surrounded by her students and colleagues, laughing and sharing stories. Gabriel, in a further corner, watched. He was not used to these moments, to feel part of something so authentic. But there, among those people, he found something he never knew he needed: belonging. When his eyes met, Elena smiled at him, and he felt an unexpected heat in his chest. She walked to him, holding her hand. "You should mix more," she played. "I'm right here," he replied, lightly squeezing her fingers. While the night advanced, the two were called on the stage. The community leader gave a brief speech, thanking everyone for the collective effort that made that project possible. But when he mentioned Gabriel, there was a hesitation in the crowd, followed by sincere applause. He had won those people, something that once seemed unthinkable. Gabriel took the microphone, and for a moment, was silent, looking at the people in front of him. "I could stay here and talk about numbers, strategies or profits," he started, his calm and firm voice. "But the truth is that this project is not about any of this. It is about you. About what it means to value the stories that each one carries here." He paused, looking at Elena. "And it is also about learning that sometimes we need someone to show us that we can be better. To remember that success is not merely measured by what we build, but by the people we play in the process." Applause filled the park, but Gabriel's world boiled down to Elena's thrilled smile. That night, back on the roof, Elena was in the kitchen, preparing tea as she always did. Gabriel entered, watching her for a moment before speaking. "Did you know things would end like this?" She laughed, turning to him. "No way. But I think this is the grace of life, is it? We don't always know where we're going to end." He approached, holding his face delicately. "I know where I want to be." She looked at him, his breath almost stopping with the intensity in his eyes. "And where would it be?" "With you." always with you. Elena felt the tears come, but this time she didn't try to hold them. She knew that those words came from Gabriel's heart, a heart she had learned to know, ask for play. They kissed, and at that moment the world finally seemed at peace. Our story for today comes to an end, friends, but before we say goodbye, I need your help to keep this rhythm of stories alive. If this story moved, inspired, or simply entertained you, don't hesitate to give this video a like. It's as simple as a click, but it means the world to us. Do you want more stories like this one? Then subscribe to Happiness of Love and don't forget to activate the notification bell so you never miss any of our new adventures. Remember, we have a new video every 2 days. Share this video with your friends and family, who knows? You might inspire someone to make a positive change in the world. Leave us a comment letting us know which part of the story touched your heart the most. We love reading your thoughts and connecting with you. And if you're watching this on your phone, don't forget to hit the hype button to show your enthusiasm and help us reach even more people with these inspiring stories. Thank you for being part of the Happiness of Love community. Your support is like the heartbeat of this channel, vital and full of life. Oh, and before you go, check out the video popping up on the screen right now. It's another amazing story you won't want to miss. See you in 2 days with another story that will take your breath away. Until then, keep the rhythm of love and inspiration alive, one beat at a time.